Anti-D Law welcomes you to the 7-day course for the LSAT-India. In this course, you will receive 7 lessons each for logical reasoning, analytical reasoning, and reading comprehension. So let's begin with today's lecture.
Today's lesson is LR3, the third lesson on logical reasoning.
The questions we'll be solving in today's video are taken from the LSAT-India official prep test. So in case you want to have a look at these questions on the official website, you can use the reference given here. First, attempt to solve this question by your own self before you listen to my explanation. So we'll first try to make some sense of the passage and then go on to the options. So as you can see, the passage talks about a complaint, right? And the complaint is with regard to the intellectual skills or the intellectual abilities of the human mind. So what he says here is that the electronic media has caused the corrosion of the skills that were required by the literary media. So what he means to say is that if you were using pen and paper and text, that required a certain kind of intellectual ability, and those skills have been corroded because there is the use of electronic media. This is what is being said now. But it makes a mention of something which was said, or a complaint which was made several centuries ago. So I'll call this centuries ago. The same thing was said about literary media. So centuries ago they said that the oral culture, so when things were not written down, right? The literary culture is again a culture where things are written down. So centuries ago it was said that this would also lead to a corrosion, right? Because now you would lose several skills such as memory and eloquence and all of this, right? So as you can see, first it talks about a corrosion that has been caused by electronic media, which has been made, and which is a complaint that is made now. And then it goes on to talk of a similar argument that was made centuries ago, which was about corrosion that is caused by the literary media. Okay? Now, what is it that the question requires of us? So as you can see, after making this complaint, you can see the last line of this thing here. It says that so what awaits us is probably a mere alteration rather than its devolution, which means that just as there was a change of what was required when you went from oral to literary, there was a change, there was an alteration of the human mind. Likewise, when you go from literary to electronic, this also would be an alteration. Now, what the question is asking you is that the reference made to the complaint of several centuries ago, so this reference that has been made here, what is the role played by it in the argument? So it is saying, what is the role played by the reference to this old argument? Now, as you can see, the role being played by it is basically this, that when someone says that electronic media is corroding the mind, he says that this is something that was said about literary media as well, but you saw that the literary media did not corrode the mind. So he's perhaps using this as an argument, as a kind of example, to say that since the change from oral to literary did not lead to a corrosion of the mind, the same thing will not happen even when you go from literary to electronic. Alright, now let's look at the options and see as to which one kind of conforms to what we just arrived at. It's very important for us to understand as to what the question requires of us, because once you know that, it's very simple. The option will simply follow. Okay, what you can see here is that we'd seen from this passage that it starts off by saying that the electronic media has led to a corrosion of the skills required by the literary media, right? This is what is being said now. But he also talks about a similar complaint. So there are basically complaints that are being made. The complaint about corrosion. So a similar complaint about corrosion was also made centuries ago, when it said that when there was a shift from oral to literary, that a similar corrosion would happen. Now what the question is asking you is this. The question is asking you, why has this argument been made? What was the need for this argument, right? So as you can see, he is basically giving you an example here. He is giving you an example of a case where there has been a change, right? But the change has not led to a corrosion. And then once you've understood this, you can clearly see that the answer to this is the option C. If you look at the other options, right, you'd find that these are either extraneous, it involves data which has been given from outside, or it is too extreme. Let's take, for example, look at option D. It uses the word unwarranted, right? It's a very extreme word. I will get rid of this. Look at option A. It speaks the exact opposite of what is being said here. Take a moment, read option A. It is the opposite of what is being suggested by the passage. So you can eliminate option A as well, right? Similarly, when you look at option B, it talks about something which is very vague. It talks about intellectual abilities and about the means of communication, and that's not what is the main point of the passage, right? So you can eliminate B as well. Likewise, if you look at option E, right, it says that possible evidence mentioned and then dismissed that might be cited by supporters of the hypothesis being criticized. Again, it talks about things that are not the subject matter of the passage. All right, let's move to our next question. So pause the video and try solving it by your own self before you listen to my explanation. All right, as you can see, this question is asking you as to what the assumption is, right? What is the assumption? How you must understand this is that let us say there's a certain fact and then there's a conclusion, okay? Between the fact and the conclusion always lies an assumption in these kind of questions. So he's asking you as to what the assumption is. Now, what is the conclusion first? The conclusion is very simple to identify. You can see thus the actions, right? So this is the conclusion, and then what is there before this is kind of the fact, and now we have to see as to what the assumption is. Now let's have a look at this once again. So what you can see here is that the philosopher is basically talking about actions, and that actions can be of two kinds. So the philosopher says that the actions can either be morally right or they can be morally wrong. He goes on to say that an action is morally right, okay? That an action is morally right if it increases the aggregate well-being of the people affected by it, and he says it is wrong if and only if it would reduce or decrease the aggregate well-being of the people affected by it. Then he goes on to say, thus, actions which leave the aggregate well-being unchanged. So as you can see, here there's an increase, here there's a decrease, but what about the actions where there is no change? For this, he says, he concludes, this is his conclusion, that actions that would be reasonably expected to leave unchanged are also right. So he says that if it increases, then also it's morally right. If there is no change, then also it is morally right. So now we have to see as to what the assumption is. Let's go and look at the options. So an action, as we saw, can either lead to an increase, in that case it is right, okay? The second thing that can happen is that it can cause a decrease, in that case it is wrong, or it can be a case of no change. Now, is no change right or is no change wrong? What we have seen is that he concludes that it is right. Now how can he conclude that no change is, which is basically this line here, the dividing line, because if increase is on this side and decrease is on this side, no change is in the middle. But he has concluded that no change is on the right. What that means is that only things that reduce are wrong, and other things which cause no change, they are also right. This is the assumption, and as soon as you can identify this assumption, you can see that this is given in the option C, right? So what you have to realize is that if anything causes either an increase or to remain the same, like we understand this, greater than or equal to, that is right. And this thing which has come here, which is the result of this equal to, is the assumption, because the assumption is that if it does not cause wrong, then it has to be treated as right. So this thing in the middle is not a wrong, therefore you're considering it right. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So this is the third and the last question for this session. So first try solving this question by your own self, and then we'll look at the solution together. So first we try doing this without looking at the options. Now, what does the question want of you? The question is basically asking you as to which of these, so which of the four options, if true, would most seriously weaken the argument given here. Alright, which means we first have to find out as to what the argument is, and then we would have to see as to how we can weaken it, and the one that weakens it is the right answer. Okay, so what is the argument above? You see, the passage above says that although there have been an increase in the sales over the past 3 years, there will be a reversal of this trend in the near future. So what he says is that although until now there has been an increase, he says that in the near future there will be a decrease. And now he gives a reason for this. He said earlier these video games were mainly purchased by people between the age of 13 to 16 years. Then he says that over the next 10 years, these people will reduce, and since the number of people who mainly buy this thing are going to reduce, this will lead to a reduction in the overall sales of video game. So this is his argument. So he says that mainly the video games are bought by these people will reduce, since they reduce, the sales will reduce. So now we have to see as to what weakens this argument. So if we have to weaken the argument, basically we have to find something which is the opposite of what is said here, or which is contrary to what is said here, right? That is how you can weaken it. Now if you look at option A, for example, option A says that most people above the age of 17 have never purchased a video game. Now this is what has been said in the passage as well. In the passage it says that most people are between 13 and 16. Option A is saying that most people above 17 have never bought it. So this is not the opposite. It is similar, or it is at least consonant with what is given here. So this cannot be the answer, right? So you need to look for which one of these options goes contrary, which one is opposite. And if you look at the options, then the very obvious answer is the option E, because here it says most of the people who have purchased the video over the past 3 years are over the age of 16. So what you were saying until here is that 3/4 are between 13 and 16, but here what you see is that most people are more than 16, that the people are more than 16, which means that this is going contrary, and therefore E is the answer. You'd find that the other options either are in conformity or are too vague and are not related.